All right. Remember that from the beginning, Kant has told us that metaphysics has both an immanent connotation and a transcendent connotation. What that means is that metaphysics does not pertain only to speculation into the existence of transcendental entities, like does God exist, or does the soul exist, and is it separate from the body? But rather, the judgments that we make in everyday experience, like that one event is the cause of another event, or the principles that express the laws of nature, like every event must have a cause, themselves contain a metaphysical component. Because when I say that ball A is the cause of motion in ball B, I am employing the concept of cause, or the principle of cause and effect, which purports to be universal and necessary. Every universal event must necessarily have a cause. Okay? And whenever I say that some principle has necessary and universal application, it is metaphysical. Okay? Because it cannot be derived from my empirical experience of the physical world. Experience, for Kant, remember, is always a perception made possible by the sensibility and its a priori forms of intuition, space and time, with a concept or multiple concepts, which are a priori belonging to the faculty of the understanding. So when a concept is synthesized with a percept, this yields experience. I experience the world in terms of cause and effect, in terms of existence, in terms of possibility and necessity, because human reason automatically synthesizes space-time perceptions or percepts with a priori concepts which are necessary and universal. We could never derive necessary and universal concepts from perception alone. Hume realized that. Because no matter how many times I experience or perceive a constant correlation of events, the most I can say is that I have yet to perceive a counterexample. But no sample, no matter how large, of the constant connection of events in space and time can ever justify making a necessary and universal proposition. If judgments of experience, like A is the cause of B, or the wax is the same substance before and after it is melted, then those concepts, cause and substance, and the 10 others that Kant lists, must be a priori. Okay? They must be pure and discovered a priori. Yes.
What does a priori mean?
A priori means independent of sensory perception. Okay? Now, I will grant you, as will Kant, that unless I have a sensory perception, then my 12 a priori concepts of the understanding will lay dormant. I would never have had an experience of cause and effect had I not a perception to which I can apply that concept. Likewise, in the absence of the a priori necessary and universal concepts of the understanding, my perceptions remain perceptions and not experiences. Okay? In order to have an experience, I must have perception, something seen, synthesized with conception, or a concept, which belongs a priori to the faculty of understanding. Now, the big breakthrough that allows Kant to say that our space-time perceptions synthesized with our a priori concepts of the understanding make knowledge of the world possible and entitles us to say that we know that A causes B, is that the concepts are applicable only to objects of possible experience, which means space-time perceptions. They do not apply to things in themselves. My experience, my world, what we call nature, is the world as it is represented by my reason to itself. The concepts are valid only for objects of a possible experience. If I attempt to apply the concepts to things in themselves, then what I say is meaningless because I have no perception of things in themselves. Just like Locke said, I only have my ideas to work with, and my mind is structured to experience spatial, temporal phenomena, and to experience those phenomena as subject to the principles that are the concepts of the understanding. We do not derive the laws of nature from perception. Rather, we impose our concepts upon perception. Our 12 concepts are the laws of nature. And so there is no subject-object dualism. While I certainly can talk colloquially about subject and object, right? I'm the subject, the desk is the object. There would be no desk, no object, no relation between that object and another object, if it weren't for my forms of intuition, space and time, which make the perception possible in the first place, and my concepts of the understanding, which allow me to understand the behavior of those objects in space and time. The subject is always part of the judgment. I never render judgments about things in themselves which exist independently of my representation of them to myself. So again, what I like to say is that when I experience the world, I am experiencing the structure of my own consciousness, because I cannot experience the world in any other way. Just like a tape recorder can only reproduce the sounds which it is structured to reproduce, human reason can only experience the world according to the way it is structured. Okay? I have no idea what it is like for a non-human being to perceive the world. Okay? Time may pass differently for different beings. Okay? Knowledge is possible because the object of our knowledge is made possible by the structures of our mind that make the experience possible in the first place. Okay? So Kant originally referred to his system as transcendental idealism. That is, my idea of the world is transcended by the structure of reason. It is made possible by the structure of reason. But because the idealism part was too suggestive of what Berkeley had said, Kant prefers to refer to his philosophy as critical philosophy, or critical idealism, because he is showing what reason is capable of knowing, but also the limits of human understanding. And that's where we are now. Okay? While human reason is perfectly suited to render judgments about the world of phenomena, of things that happen, the world of my experience, because the world of my experience is made possible by those structures. Okay? When I attempt to make judgments of that which lies beyond the realm of possible experience, I have gone beyond what human reason is capable of doing. And so now we are talking about the transcendental use of reason. When I use my reason to make judgments about the world of experience, that is an immanent use of reason. Immanent means dwelling within. But when I begin to speculate, for example, about the first cause, God, or the soul, or anything else which could never be the object of a possible experience, because there is no perception, my reason is operating transcendentally. Okay? And what Kant does in this section is to show why this happens. Why human reason is compelled to reach beyond the limits of its understanding. Okay? Now remember, we said that, as Kant famously states in the Critique of Pure Reason, that concepts without percepts are empty. The concept of substance is an empty formalism without a perception to which I apply it. And percepts without concepts are blind. And what I am blind to is precisely the concept which unites those space-time perceptions under a common law, like the law of cause or the law of substance. Okay? But reason always seeks the unconditioned. Now, what does that mean? When I perceive A followed by B, and my understanding then unites A and B with the concept of cause, so that I experience A as the cause of B. That perception is conditioned by the concept. Okay? My experience is conditioned by the sensibility and the understanding synthesizing percepts and concepts. Okay? But reason seeks the unconditioned as well. And let me demonstrate what I mean by that. Human reason is inclined always to complete a series, like a series of causes. Okay? So imagine that I take a stone and I throw it into a pond. And the stone causes a ripple, which causes another ripple, and so on and so forth, right? Until the ripples get smaller and smaller and eventually end. Now, if I trace this causal series in reverse, I say that the outermost ripple is caused by the one before it, which itself is caused by the one before it, and so on back to the rock striking the water, the cause of which is my throwing the rock into the water. Okay? But then if I ask, what is the cause of my throwing the rock? What is the answer we give?
Because you want to.
Yes. I made the free decision to do so. My freedom is the cause of throwing the rock. But can I have a perception of my freedom? If I say, show me freedom, what are you going to point to?
Transcendent.
Right. You can point to the effects of my freedom, namely the rock flying into the water, but you have no perception of the freedom itself. But in order to complete that series of causes, to give it a beginning, okay, reason reaches beyond what it can perceive and generates the concept of freedom. And so, freedom, which is one of the three transcendental ideas, arises from an unconditioned use of the concept of cause. My concept of cause is legitimate when it applies to the relationship between the rock and the first ripple, and the first ripple and the second ripple, and even between the motion of my arm and hand and the velocity, the trajectory of the rock. But when I then seek to explain the cause of my throwing the rock, I say it was my free decision, my will, freedom. But now I have used the concept of cause without any perception to which I can apply it. When I say that the rock causes the ripple, the concept of cause is conditioned by the perception of the rock striking the water. Okay? Or I could say that the rock striking the water is conditioned by the concept of cause. Okay? In other words, the rock is the condition of the ripple. But when I try to use this concept of cause all by itself without synthesizing it with a perception, it is empty. Concepts without percepts are empty. And I generate the transcendental idea of freedom. That is, a cause which acts outside of space and time. I can have no space-time perception of freedom. So what would it mean to say that there is a cause, which of course is an event, right, that is not in space and time? Space and time make the perception of events possible. And so this attempt to talk about a cause that is not synthesized with a space-time perception gives rise to what Kant calls a noumenon. Not a phenomenon, which is something that I see and experience according to the concepts of the understanding, but a noumenon, which is a pure, rational concept. Not a concept of the understanding, but a pure, rational concept. And so that we don't get confused about the two uses of the word concept, Kant decides to call these pure beings of thought. They exist nowhere but in our minds. And I can neither prove that we are free, nor can I disprove that we are free, because there is no perception to be conditioned by this concept. It lies outside the limits of human understanding. But I can't help myself. I can't help but to ask what initiated the series of events. Because my reason jumps way ahead, or I should say way behind, what I could possibly perceive. If you think about the whole world as it exists right now, let's say at time t, okay? Here's the world now. And everything that happened the moment before was the cause of the world at this time, then let's say that time t is conditioned by time t minus 1, which is conditioned by time t minus 2, and so on and so forth backwards, okay? But if I continue like this, I run into an infinite regress. It'll go on forever. unless I assert that there was a first cause to get the series started, then I can't explain how the present moment arose. But I can't. I cannot affirm a first cause, because that would be a cause which not only lies outside of space and time, but occurred before there was space and time. And if a cause is an event, and events presuppose space and time, to say that there was a cause before there were space and time is a contradiction. But at the same time, I cannot help myself but to say there must have been a first cause. Because if this series goes on to infinity, and each moment, no matter how small, takes some period of time, then it would have taken an infinite amount of time for the present moment to arrive, which means that the present could not have arisen. So I'm doomed either way. If I say there was no first cause, then I can't explain how the world got here. If I do say that there was a first cause, then I have violated my reason. Okay? All right. So, again, where does the transcendental idea of freedom come from? It comes from the attempt at an unconditioned use of the concept of the understanding that we call cause. It is the attempt to think a cause without and applying it to a space-time perception. Now, what about the soul? Remember, reason is compelled to complete a series. Okay? It seeks the unconditioned. So let's take Descartes' wax. I have a perception of the solid wax and of all the mutations it passes through to become the melted wax. Those perceptions in space and time get united with the concept of substance, a thing which stays the same throughout changes in space and time. You got it? The concept of substance helps me or allows me to think about the wax as the same thing despite changes to its appearance through time. Okay? But if I ask, what is this substance in itself? In other words, let's strip away all of the appearances of the wax. Let's take away my perceptions of the wax and ask about what the wax is in itself. I come up with the idea of a substance, namely something which stays the same throughout changes in space and time, that exists outside of space and time. How can something stay the same unless it exists in time? To persist through time requires time. But if I try to think about a complete subject, like the wax, independent of my perceptions of that wax in space and time, I have just suggested the idea of a substance, something which stays the same, that exists outside of space and time. But to stay the same requires time. Sameness is the element of permanence throughout changes in space and time. So again, the attempt to use the concept of substance in this case, all by itself, without synthesizing it with a space-time perception, gives rise to the transcendental idea of the soul. Because actually what we're talking about here is not a material substance, we're talking about ourselves. When I think of myself, okay, what do you think of? How do you identify yourself? Well, by your memories, by your experiences, which are all events in space and time. But if you then strip away all of those memories, just like Descartes tries to strip away all of the accidents from the wax and say there's something left over, a material substance, he's left with nothing. If I try to think about what I am in myself, independent of the way I experience myself, which always means through my perceptions, the perception of my memories, my experiences. In other words, when I seek the complete subject, complete in itself, not subject to the space-time perceptions by which I identify myself, then I come up with the idea of the soul, an unconditioned substance. A substance not conditioned by any perceptions in space and time. Now again, I can't help it, okay? Because when I say, look, I did this, I did that, I have these memories. Well, what is this I that I'm talking about? But if I try to talk about the I, the ego, me, all by itself, that is independently of the concrete space-time perceptions and memories that I have, I come up with an empty concept of the soul. And again, like freedom, soul is a transcendental idea. I can neither prove the soul exists, nor can I disprove that the soul exists. It is a noumenon, not a phenomenon. A phenomenon is something that happens. And for something to happen, there must be space and time. Freedom and soul are noumena, pure beings of thought, transcendental ideas, or if you will, the thing in itself. Okay? Now the last one, of course I should be consistent here, as freedom arises from an attempt at the unconditioned use of the concept of cause, soul arises from the unconditioned use of the concept of substance. But what about the transcendental idea of God? In this case, unlike the other two, pure reason. Now you understand why he's calling this faculty pure reason. It is pure because it is not conditioned by concrete perceptions. It is not a practical use of reason. It is a pure use of reason. Okay? When it comes to my idea of God, pure reason completely goes berserk. Okay? It is not seeking to complete a series, as in the case of freedom, nor is it seeking a complete subject, as it does when it generates the idea of soul, but rather it seeks the concept of completeness itself. Completeness in general, pure completeness, the all in all, the alpha and the omega, absolute inclusiveness, unlimitedness, the infinite. And that's what I mean by God. Okay? So the idea of God arises from the attempt of pure reason to think completeness in general. Not a complete series, or even a complete subject, but just completeness. And that's what gives rise to the transcendental idea, the noumenon, God. Now, if we went a little bit further into this, you would see that the idea of freedom, what he calls the psychological idea. No, excuse me. He calls freedom the cosmological idea, okay? Because it is the idea which explains events in space and time. And that's what we refer to as nature, or the cosmos, okay? The soul, he calls the psychological idea. God, he calls the theological idea, okay? But branching off of the cosmological idea are what Kant calls four antinomies of pure reason. Okay? And what Kant demonstrates is that reason can give equally good reasons or arguments for the assertion that the world must have a beginning and that the world cannot have a beginning. That there is a necessary being or there is not a necessary being. That the world has a beginning in time, that the world does not have a beginning in time. That there is a smallest particle or there is not a smallest particle. Okay? That there are causes through freedom or everything is nature. These are what he calls antinomies because they are anti or against nomos, reason. Anti-nomos, against reason. And all my pure reason can do is stand back and watch itself battle it out. Okay? Because it cannot reach a decision. And interestingly, I find that that is the moment when existential thought is born. Because when it comes to the questions that ultimately matter to us, whether I have a soul, whether God exists, whether there is a meaning of human existence, whether there is a purpose individual to me, reason is incapable of providing an answer. And so what Kierkegaard says, who is the father of existential thought, is that when reason enters the despair of the dialectic of pure reason, it is in a position to make a leap of faith. It makes a decision to believe. And it doesn't matter what you believe. Because even our objective judgments, like that one event is the cause of another, already involve the subject. Because I am already necessarily part of the world of my understanding. Kierkegaard pushes us to become purely subjective, to make a leap of faith, to make a decision. And so for him, the highest point of existence possible for a being that exists in time is not knowledge. It is not the immanent world. It is passion. Passion for whatever it is that can sustain me through the ravages of existence in space and time. Okay? Now we're going to talk a bit about existentialism when we get into the Sartre and the Heidegger, even though Heidegger would resist the appellation existentialist. Okay? But that's as far as I want to go with the Kant. Okay? What Kant has shown us here is how metaphysics in general is possible. And by this he means transcendental metaphysics. What compels reason to attempt demonstrations of the existence of God, or the existence of soul, or freedom, is that our concepts, like cause and substance and community and existence and possibility, necessity, are so reliable. I mean, every time I experience the cause of an effect, my concept of cause is validated. That I'm tempted to use them all by themselves. But here's the answer that Kant gives. If the unconditioned use of the concepts of substance and cause and the notion of completeness in general generate transcendental ideas which can neither be proven nor disproven, why does reason do this? Now, at this point, Kant admits that he is speculating. Everything in nature works according to purposes. Okay? And so Kant supposes that there must also be a purpose behind the tendency of reason to seek the unconditioned, the transcendental. And the reason that he offers is basically to keep us from despairing, to give us hope. The ideas of God, freedom, and soul are perhaps something like psychological defense mechanisms. The way he actually puts it is this: the idea of freedom deters reason from making the rash conclusion of naturalism or determinism. The idea that everything that happens is natural and the result of some prior cause which necessitates that effect. Because that rash conclusion is depressing. To think that there really is no freedom, that my freedom is just an illusion, is depressing because I spend a lot of time and energy trying to make the right decisions. And to think that all of my worry about doing the right thing, not to mention the punishment that I suffer for having done the wrong thing, and the guilt that I experience when I feel like I've done the wrong thing, is all for naught if there is no such thing as freedom. The idea of soul exists in order to deter reason from the rash conclusion of materialism, or the view that everything is matter and there is no realm of spirit. That when the body dies, that's it. And the idea of God exists in order to deter reason from the rash conclusion of fatalism, or the idea that the universe exists without any design, without any rhyme or reason, that it is just the result of the blind impulse of energy arising from nothing and headed nowhere. That we are just a fluke and nothing means anything. So there is Kant's answer. It's not a definitive answer, it's just a speculation, admittedly. Okay?
That's all it could be. I
Right.
think it's weird that he shows, or that he makes it clear that there's limits, or this is beyond our understanding, and then points them out, and then, I don't know, comments further on it. But he's already explained why.
You know, yeah. Remember, the point of the critique of pure reason was to solve or overcome Hume's skepticism, to show that indeed knowledge of the world of my experience is possible and how it is possible. But of course, the trade-off is the admission that I cannot have knowledge of the thing in itself, of that which lies outside the realm of possible experience. Okay? But the very fact that reason seems compelled, as is evidenced from the history of philosophy, going back to the pre-Socratics, to speculate about the thing in itself, about God and the soul, deserves some consideration, right? And there is no harm in hazarding a guess, but it is just a guess, because the whole point of the critical philosophy is to show the limits of human reason. And indeed, you're right. What he's doing here, by suggesting a reason for our speculative use of pure reason, goes beyond what I am entitled to. Okay? We have an inner need. This is where existentialism begins. Kierkegaard, who was writing in the mid-19th century, okay, just 70 years or something after Kant, says that we have an infinite need of inwardness, a need to believe in something. And an infinite need can never be satisfied by an approximation, which is all that science can ever deliver. And so, when it comes to the things that we really care about, we are forced to make a decision. I don't decide. When I see A happen and then B happen, I don't decide that A is the cause of B. I experience it that way. It is only in the face of uncertainty, the things I cannot know, that I must make a decision. You don't decide. For example, if I say that A is greater than B, and you believe that, you don't decide that B is less than A. Your reason is compelled to affirm that. That's not a free decision. For Kierkegaard, genuine decision making requires uncertainty. So what starts off in the realm of objective knowledge as an obstacle to the truth, in our subjectivity becomes something to be celebrated. It is the fact that I cannot be certain about what the ultimate meaning of life is, that I must make a decision. And because I have to make a decision, I've taken a risk. Not a risk of being proven wrong, because there is no proof on either side of these issues. But the risk is that I decide to believe in something which I can't sustain.
So ignorance really is bliss.
Or at least makes bliss possible. Ignorance is the condition of bliss, because I must choose. And only where there is that mystery can I remain passionate. I can't be passionate about this. What do we get impassioned about? Conversations about religion, conversations about politics, about the things that can't be proven, because those are the things that matter to us. Okay?
Is it because like transcendental ideas, it's infinite, and science does the opposite, to where it's like exact, finite?
Yes, science, of course, is a description, or the attempt at a description of the immanent world, the world of space and time. Okay?
So it's like we have a repulsion to things that are immanent.
It's not that we're repulsed by them, we use them, they're practical, we need them, but they don't answer the question of why we're here. You know, I can tell you how to, I can tell you how to save a life, I can tell you how to take a life, but I can't tell you when you ought to do so. Okay? Not scientifically.
I don't like how they use it rash assertions. The three transcendental ideas serve to deter the rash assertions.
Right, well, he calls them rash just because they are, rash means unconsidered. It means we jump to those conclusions.
But it's a logical and rational path that would lead us to those conclusions. Like, would it be so bad if
The rash conclusions are not that God or soul or freedom exist. The
Yeah.
rash conclusions are that they don't,
Exactly.
okay? And they are rash precisely because,
No, it's not that they don't, it's just that there's no need to talk about it, because it's beyond our
right,
understanding.
exactly. And that's why they're rash conclusions. Because to make a determination one way or the other, either that God exists or God does not exist, is not to have considered the limits of human understanding. Okay? And this is precisely where religious fanaticism comes from. Because they attempt to take what is transcendental into the domain of the immanent and prove, say, I know that God exists and this is his law. And that is the religious zealot, the fanatic.
I guess I just disagree with them that it wouldn't be depressing if we didn't know we didn't live forever, or we didn't have a
Yeah,
purpose or something like that.
well,
Like, it's still awesome.
yeah. But of course, this is just a good lesson in where, Kant had his project, and his project spawns the next step, okay? Which is really postmodernism, existential thought, phenomenology. Okay.